I thought I'd start this unit with a little perspective. I'm a big fan of computer history. Someday when I retire, I want to be a docent at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, which is the best of its kind in the world. Until then, I will have to satisfy myself with occasionally injecting little relevant anecdotes into the courses I teach that I call Armando's Computer History Minute. I don't know if anybody might recognize these photos, but these are photos of the ENIAC, widely considered to be the first or one of the first generally programmable, fully electronic computers. This was a classified defense project that was developed at the University of Pennsylvania during World War II. And up until that time, all computers had been essentially electromechanical, which greatly limited the speed at which they could operate. This was one of the first designs to use all vacuum tubes, which require, kilowatts of electricity to work, and they get really hot and they burn out all the time. But they were, 2-3 orders of magnitude faster in terms of how many operations per second compared to mechanical switches that had to move around. So it was a really important project, even though it never sort of fully worked in time to be a lot of help in the war effort. A lot of its ideas and a lot of the experience of how difficult it was to program it informed the first commercially available computer, which was the UNIVAC 1 in the United States. And I thought we might hear a couple of minutes worth of interview footage from one of the earliest programmers in the US, people who were tasked with programming this beast. The picture on the left shows one of the first programmers, and she is standing at the far right of the picture. And we're going to hear from one of her colleagues, and hopefully this short video works.
From the beginning, were a pair. And I don't know many of you work technically, but I believe that the best programs, the best design, and all this stuff is done by pairs, because you can criticize each other and, find each other's errors and use the best ideas, and it really works very well. Later on, I have thought about why did Betty and I become so successful? And we were successful. And I think it's because we were finishers. Because most people like to do the fun part of a design or a program, but they hate doing the nasty little details that usually take more than the middle design. And so you have to take care of everything and think of everything so that it works. Well, I was good at it, but Betty was even better than I am. She was fantastic.
A quote from Betty Snyder Holberton.
Oh, yeah.
Look like a girl, act like a lady, and work like a dog.
You skipped a line.
Oh, I skipped a line. What?
Think like a man.
Oh. I don't know, though. I think you all were doing some great thinking there. Great thinking.
The smartest thing we did was to have Marlon and Ruth calculate a trajectory exactly the same way the ENIAC did it, add time by add time. Well, this is the document that made people respect us. Because of those 18,000 vacuum tubes, we could find the one that wasn't working in a very few minutes with that. And people never recognized, they never acted as though we knew what we were doing. I mean, we were in a lot of pictures, but they never asked us anything. Well, we did all the programming for it. I mean, it was absurd.
So it's interesting cultural time slice in a lot of ways. And by the way, if you think this is interesting, there is a great documentary available on a lot of the streaming services called Top Secret Rosies. It is about the group of fewer than a dozen women, including Jean Bartik, who passed away a few years ago, who were basically handed the job of programming this thing before programming was really a thing. All of the men were off fighting in the war, mostly in Europe. And so who did they recruit? They recruited women who had aptitude as math teachers, or they had advanced degrees in mathematics, because that was sort of the closest thing. You were going to program this thing to solve equations. But I think there's 3 really great ideas in there that in some sense are kind of ahead of their time. One of them is the idea of working in pairs and sort of cross-checking each other's work all the time. I think it's interesting that, she's talking about work that they did in the early 1940s, and it's kind of the beginning of what has now become formalized as pair programming. The second was the thing about attention to detail, that there's the sort of fun, big picture stuff, but that the devil really is in the detail. Getting something to work requires a certain amount of craftsmanship, or craftswomanship in this case. And I think that's worth taking to heart. It's always that last 10% of the functionality that seems to take 80% of the effort. And I think it's important to hear that that's sort of always been true. And then the last one speaks to testability. In case it wasn't 100% clear what she was talking about at the end, one of their sort of test programs was that they had a very complex equation that they made a point of essentially hand simulating exactly the way the computer would do it when that program was run. It was sort of a set of test values, and they could check the final result, they could check intermediate results, and this was basically a way of doing debugging. If something wasn't working, this allowed them to sort of quickly narrow down which of the intermediate operations wasn't being correct, and that in turn would help figure out what part of the hardware needed to be fixed. So the idea of sort of testing as this surgical tool that you sort of have on hand all the time, and when something just goes wrong, it gives you a very quick way to narrow down where the problem is, an idea that sort of has only gained more in relevancy as time goes on. So that was a few words from one of the US's first computer programmers.